Knowing, when they're utilizing this, how they're potentially putting it into production, and whether or not there are additional checks and controls for safety, for example, that are being put in that are not necessarily AI oriented.
From my end, again, from the system integrators that I've talked to, everyone has always made the point that, they're using this tool with caution. They're using it as a guide or a suggestion. They're never taking kind of what it spits out and plugging that right in. So someone who knows what they're doing is kind of reviewing that. But there are other tools that they can use to train these models and make them more accurate. Um, but safety is really one of those areas where this is still being explored, I think, and it's kind of probably the biggest challenge out there, especially when you're starting to think about autonomous operations or taking operators out of the equation completely. We're a long way from that, I think, in general, but
I
maybe
hope
we'll
so.
get there.
Right. Yeah, I don't see anybody letting AI any kind of AI bot or chat design a control loop anytime soon. However, going back, on that data point, though, that it's a good knowledge transfer. That's one of the things I think in our sector that everybody is really, that's the low-hanging fruit you're talking about jumping on. Because now the data that comes in has to be good. And
Mhm.
that data comes from the people who are currently working in the industry, and then it gets in there. So now you have future people coming in and they can actually ask the question and get the summary and get from the data. You could potentially have literature and training manuals and training processes. And then you can go into the maintenance side, like this is how you fix that. This is what the problem, things of that nature. But trusting it to just solve all safety problems. I don't think anybody's got that on their radar at this point.
Yeah,
And,
well, I know I've actually played with it from a programming aspect,
yeah.
and I found it both enlightening and frustrating because while it was able to point me in certain directions, give me some examples, they were oftentimes extremely basic. And if I tried to get it to do something much more advanced, it oftentimes went off on a tangent and gave me something that was completely worthless.
Mhm.
Advantage is that I knew what I was going to be doing and I had a good background in that area. So I could easily recognize where there was a problem. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case in the field. For example, Rihanna, how many mechanical engineers are, adept at looking at what these LLMs are going to be kicking out?
They're not really, and this is why I think there's a real interest in and the popularity that we see, I don't want to say hype because it's not the right word, but I think the elevation of base models that can be used as plugins that we're seeing. So I was referring to universal robots. If I can go through one example of how they use their partnership with NVIDIA, for example. So we know that behind creating the complexities of creating a robot that can move in changing environments, there's a neural network. So in its current iteration, this specialization now unlocks generative physical AI, which is this area that I've been very curious about, or providing information about the spatial relationship of the physical rules in the environment. So the objective here is to facilitate a more natural action between the human and the machine. And to your point, where's the safety in this scenario? With physical AI, robots can now demonstrate potentially a transformative operational capability within these settings, right? So with generating advanced insights, they're saying, and actions, it will invariably demand strategic partnerships. In this case, it was Universal Robots' Polyscope X software platform is powered by NVIDIA Isaac. And so just to geek out a little bit on how it works, specifically the UR is, UR is integrating Isaac Manipulator. This is a reference workflow built on still other NVIDIA computing packages to expedite advanced AI robotics applications. And so with this built-in demo programs, users presumably those mechanical engineers can now unlock features such as pose estimation, tracking, object detection, path planning, image classification, quality inspection, and state detection. So the immediate payoff for them has been the validation of a cluster of AI use cases for robot arms, for manipulators that can now seamlessly perceive, understand, and interact with their environments. It'll be interesting to see with time that we can prevent accidents or any I'd say workplace safety as well.
Another thing I was going to sort of bring up is an issue, vendor lock-in. And a lot of designers already have that in place simply because they're going to be very dedicated to a particular supplier. But this is one instance where, given that the models and things are potentially coming from other parties, that could be a challenge as you go down the road in terms of, developing systems. Not just for, being required to use something, but, is that going to be supported in the long term? How many of the systems we're talking about here are more long-term in orientation, 10, 15 years in terms of having things that are going to continue to run and being supported? Len, where are most of yours? I suspect they're not as quick a turnaround as on the electronic side, where we're talking about smartphones that change every year.
No, they definitely don't. I mean, these systems are, I mean, we're still talking about systems that were developed like a quarter century ago or more, or even back in the 90s at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pardon me. I sometimes forget it's 2025 and a quarter century was still the 2000s. But yeah, I mean, but it's yeah, it's not going to be a quick turnaround, and I think that's where everybody's kind of looking to where's the value, what's the investment, and we kind of touched on that before. I just don't see anybody that I know of and just jumping into. In fact, I'll be honest, I mean, this past February at the ARC conference in Orlando, that's probably the first conference in my industry that I went to where AI was the dominant subject. So I think it's really just kind of getting started, believe it or not, in the control side. I don't.
Well, I'd be curious to see if anybody knows where and how AI is being incorporated into the system, because we sort of had this same kind of discussion when IoT was big, back in 2000. IoT was nice if you had the sensors. In many cases, you didn't necessarily have that. For example, on a production line, if you're trying to determine whether there's going to be a failure, you may be able to hook into a motor, for example, and figure out whether the thing's running properly, or you may have a vibration sensor. But what happens if you don't have that information? You may have to add that, and then you have to figure out how is it going to incorporate into your training and everything else. It could be a significant challenge.
100%. That's exactly, unlike what your experience might have been then, for me, this past 2 months has been, it's AI everywhere. Where can we find the next use case? But the thrust of it all is really still, to your point, Bill, is in R&D. They're trying to validate those use cases and to bring those to market. I've seen some interesting ones, and I've already used the UR example, and they showed me multiple, very exciting. I've seen it in CNC machining. The possibilities are endless in programming what certain graphics that you want to have incorporated, or you want. And I've seen in Taiwan, also in CNC machining, very big there with machinery examples, because they too wanted to elevate smart manufacturing and elevate artificial intelligence as part of their growth in the industry. So I've seen a few use cases with big cases with CNC machining there. At Hanover Messe, there wasn't. I don't think there were. I'd say there were more AI use cases, or what they want to put forward as use cases. Everybody had to showcase. To be part of a certain hall, you had to have at least some kind of AI application to showcase. So, from your Altairs, from your backups, from your Bosches, to Google Cloud, SAPs, they all had something that was presented through AI-driven solutions. The other thing I wanted to say about that was, I already talked about Siemens and their win on the co-pilot, but I also saw to the R&D side of things, some forward-looking breakthrough solutions. So one of which was in the pharmaceutical industry, focusing on the integration of digital twins and AI in pharmaceutical production. And one story that I plan on working on in the coming weeks in this realm, in medical devices, is a story about how technologies are combined with additive manufacturing. Again, digital design to enable the creation of custom medications tailored to individual patient needs. What's fascinating about their research there is that, whereas a medication can take through clinical trials 20 years to come to market, now with AI simulations, they're able to figure out how to do it in half that time. So so while they're not there yet, and this research again leads back to Siemens. I was on a tour, and so I got a bunch of use cases to look at. While they're still far off, I think that there is tremendous potential, particularly for those. And again, I think it comes back to affordability and how much can you integrate? How big is your company?
Why don't we see about wrapping up now, and maybe everybody give us a little tip or a direction or something that we should be keeping an eye on from an AI standpoint in your particular area. So Anna, why don't you start off?
Yeah, well, I think the focus is really on generative AI and finding ways to use that. And for a lot of engineers, I think it's right now it's experimenting with how to just get it into their normal workflow. A lot of them have base code that they use that, will get them 85% of the way there. So it's kind of how do you integrate this new tool into all the tools that they're already using?
I'd say that on two sides. On the technical side, I think the quest would be towards real-time optimization and within the control loop and the control system. And then I think on the business side, I'd not look out, but I would be aware that there's probably going to be a lot of partnerships starting to develop just to ensure data quality in a lot of different systems because everybody has different expertise.
I think that we're going to see a lot of new use cases coming out, and I think we are being trained to learn and get used to the vernacular. We're learning about physical AI. I'm learning about what's behind generative AI and the different use cases. Again, back to me and my stats. Through 2026, 20% of organizations will use AI to flatten their organizational structure. So that eliminates more than half of the current middle management positions. That's from a business standpoint. What does that mean for the skill sets that are required to actually understand how the AI works and to understand what's behind that black box? There's a lot for us to uncover, and I'm here to learn.
Okay. Well, my recommendation would be try to learn as much as you can about the various options because it's not all one type of thing. The better you have in terms of an understanding of what you can get and how it works, the better you can choose which one's going to be viable for a particular part in your application. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk again soon. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.